It started with a razor blade, the stereotypical stainless steel trapezoid that only rusts if you let the blood sit too long. I stole it from my father's workshop. My father picked me up from school that day after the principal called to inform him of my grandiose hysterical behavior. I believe that was the exact quote. I was inconsolable, a wreck, a hot mess, a 12-year-old who shouldn't have been carrying the emotional burden that I was. When he came into the principal's office, it became clear to me that I was alone. Mrs. Rollins, for being a rather voluptuous black woman in an all-white town, should have had some empathy. The townsfolk didn't want a nigger there, just like the girls in my class didn't want me learning alongside them. Mr. Halls, your daughter has been causing an excessive disturbance lately. Do you have any idea what has gotten into her? Rollins quickly blurted out, as if she was afraid her cholesterol was finally catching up with her. David, he replied. I'm sorry? Name's David. Mr. Halls is some guy in Ohio that I've never met. My dad shot me a sly wink as he frowned to try hiding his grin. Mr. Halls, Ellie has been disrupting her class almost daily since sessions began this term. She stood up and threw her hands down on her desk. Do you know what's going on with her? My father, a calm man by nature, stood straight up and slammed his hands onto Mrs. Rollins' desk, mimicking her. No, he said softly. That was the first time I laughed since school started. This is not a joke, Rollins erupted, and my father stopped hiding his smile. You're right, Donna. It isn't. My wife and I are paying you $9,000 a year for our daughter to attend this school. Do you know why we pay that, Donna? His cheeriness began to fade. We're paying that so Ellie here can get a good education, at a good school, around good people, so she can grow up and have a good life. Are you following my theme here? She nodded and returned to her chair. Good. We don't pay you $9,000 for our daughter to come home every single day in tears because some snotty little bitches hate that she eats more than a carrot stick for dinner. It is not appropriate to talk about children that way. She popped up and slammed her hands onto her desk again, this time knocking over a pile of papers. You're right. My dad sat down and crossed his arms. It isn't. No one should be talking about any child that way. Why do these girls get to call my daughter fat, Mrs. Rollins? I can't recall much of the meeting after that. I think hearing my father, my hero, acknowledging that I had a weight problem made me suppress the rest. That's what my therapist said, at least. The clearest memory I have after that meeting is stealing the blade from Dad's yellow toolkit while I sat in his shop waiting for him to finish a desk. He had so many that I was confident he would have no idea he was missing it. We went home that evening and my mother had dinner ready for us. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and carrots. I ran to my room in a fluster of, grandiose hysterical behavior. No one followed. I expected the first cut to hurt. My hands were shaking as I tried to hold the blade steady while my insides seeped out from behind it. The second cut came with greater ease. Whether that was from the loss of blood or the willingness to die, I can't say. I wanted to keep going until the end. But as foolish as it was, I freaked out when the blood started pooling on the carpet. My mother would kill me for leaving a stain in her house. I wanted sympathy, someone to care, not to chastise me. I stopped, but the blood didn't. I panicked and shouted for help as loud as I possibly could. I didn't realize how unprepared I was to die. Mr. McKinney was the nicest person I think I have ever met in my life. He wasn't like any of my teachers, bosses, or typical therapists. For 5 years, on Tuesdays and Fridays, I mattered. McKinney understood me and my struggles. In fact, he was like me. He was made fun of in school because no one wanted him there. Girls didn't breathe in his direction, and boys spared no expense reminding him of what he was. That's why he became a therapist, to help kids who were dealing with what he went through. I loved that man, and I always will. On my first visit after turning 17, we experimented with a new form of therapy that McKinney created. The first step was hypnosis. not a put you in a trance style, but rather a light, drug-induced state of lucidity. While in this calm state, he would attempt physical stimulation to manifest activity in my dream state. For the first few sessions, he would perform various pokes and rubs on my feet to see if I would make myself run while lucid. We then moved on to my thighs, where he would tickle the insides with his fingers to make me kick. He'd massage my shoulders and kiss my neck to get me to look in a particular direction. Mr. McKinney would fuck me because he was a monster. I loved every second of it, though. We had a real connection, and to this day, he's truly the only man besides my father that I loved. My second attempt was not long after I told my parents about the relationship Mr. McKinney and I were having. I pleaded and pleaded with them not to do anything. "We're in love," was my stump phrase when they would use their word for us. I tried explaining that I wanted it. I wanted him. Rape is only rape if it wasn't consensual, I said. But it didn't matter. Within a short month of being arrested, McKinney lost his office and his entire career. As we were waiting in the courtroom for the first of many trials to begin, my father collapsed onto the cold marble floors, dead on arrival. There was no hope for resuscitation, according to the paramedics. It didn't stop me from trying CPR until I had to be physically restrained. The hospital held me overnight due to my grandiose hysterical behavior. I believe the official listing for my stay was due to a mental breakdown, which, looking back on things now, was a horribly mild diagnosis considering my mental state. After my nurse left my mother and I with discharge papers, I ripped the pen from my mom's hand and shoved it into my neck as far as I could until the world went white. I didn't see anything for those 2 minutes of being legally deceased. I only heard a voice. A child's voice. He told me his name was Jonah and that we were best friends now. Jonah said he would help me get through the hard times. Jonah wasn't real, as far as I know. 5 years after we first met, I'm now quite confident of that. He was a figment of my imagination that manifested itself during a time of peak stress. He did, however, give me the confidence to make it through my last year of school after my father died. My second round of senior year started in September, a couple weeks after the rest of the kids started. My new therapist believed that all of the hustle and bustle of kids getting acclimated to their classes would be too stressful for me. I also had to have my teachers sign off that I attended every class, and then turn my sheet into the principal's office at the end of each day, where my mother would meet me and take me home. I was a prisoner living under a disguise they called freedom. My grand return to school started with homeroom, where all of my lifelong friends also happened to be, a failed, subtle attempt at keeping tabs on me. They could have at least found actual friends of mine. Instead, the class was filled with only boys who looked at me like a freak, and girls who moved on from making fun of my appearance to reminding me of how I killed my dad by being a whore. I didn't make it to my next class. Jonah came to me while I was sleeping that night. He wiped my tears and handed me a slip of paper, the address of one Isabella DeSantis, also known as the girl who led the bitches that made me how I was. Jonah told me how we could handle it. I disagreed, but he was just as persuasive as he was persistent. Together, Jonah and I walked to her house. I slid in through a window, and he followed close behind. We explored the house until we found her bedroom, all white with stupid gold decorations. She was a diva, all right. As I stood over her, looking down at the source of my years of self-hatred, I lost my confidence. I wept and backed away. I couldn't go through with it. Jonah became angry at my flaking. He took the razor blade from my hand and slit both of her wrists while holding his hand over her mouth. She only struggled for a couple of minutes, thankfully. I went home with Jonah and he held me while I slept soundly for the first time in years. I haven't seen Jonah since I fell asleep that night, but I know he's still watching me. This morning I found an address and a date in my planner. The release date of Jim McKinney and the return of my best friend. 10/18/17. I'll see you soon. Love, Ellie.